Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Thoughts of the Young Icon channel with me, Sam. Today, I want to tackle something that I feel like is going to speak to everyone's life, and that's going through tough times. In today's video, I tackle this idea of going through tough times from four different angles. I look at physical pain, I look at emotional pain, I look at financial distress, and I just look at tragedy in general. So in today's video, I'm going to share some experiences that I had that were covered in these four areas, and then how I was able to ultimately overcome. I came up with a formula myself. This formula has worked for me, and I believe that it could also work for you. Enjoy the video. Thank you very much. Have you ever been in a situation where you feel like you're having a bad day, or you're having a bad week, or you're having a bad month? I've been thinking about those type of situations the last couple of days because I've actually had a pretty rough go at it. But what it's made me realize is that, having a bad day many times is not necessarily having a bad day. It's just having a bad moment or two in that bad day. And so I just wanted to discuss and sort of share my experiences with bad times and how I've gone about addressing it and how I've been able to overcome. I remember the earliest memory that I have of a truly, truly bad time, let's say in my emotions, was when I was pretty young. I recall we were living in our house. It should have been in Namiwawa in Blantyre. That was around 2002, if I recall correctly. And in the middle of the night, we had robbers come to our house, and they broke into the house. They broke through the burglar bars, and they took pretty much everything. And that night, I recall my father was away, so it was just my brother, my mother, and I in the house, and our cook, who was preparing dinner for the time at the time when they broke in, because these guys came to break into our house. That must have been around 6 p.m. So it was pretty early into the night, and they broke into our house. Now, that left me with some trauma, and that was the first time that I ever had to address, some proper trauma. And what I noticed was that in order for me to fully address it, I needed to become comfortable once again being in a house after what had happened. And it took some time. It took some conversations with my parents. It took my parents, explaining to me that it wasn't going to happen again, that it was a once-off situation, and that in any event, I must be grateful that I came out with my life. And so I examined what they said, and yes, part of it made sense, but a certain part didn't make sense. Why was it that we were robbed? Why was it that, it was so violent? It was one of those things where, these guys, and that night I didn't count them, but I believe it must have been at least 15 or 20 people who broke into our house and took our things. And as a young person, I didn't understand what was going on. I was 8 years old. And then the next tragedy that I experienced was when I was around 12 years old, and I broke my leg. And I broke my leg while playing football. If I remember correctly, I think that day I was sort of taunting the defender. I had scored a couple of goals before, and then I think it must have been 2 or 3 goals, and I was taunting the defender. And then I was about to go and score my third goal. I'd been given a really beautiful through ball. There I was chasing the ball, and this guy just lunged at me and broke my leg. That was very traumatic for me physically. Like, I experienced a lot of physical pain. And I always remember that night because that was the first time I had ever been in a situation where I needed to go to a public hospital for an emergency. And I remember, because this was back when I was in high school, I went to Kasungu Hospital, Kasungu District Hospital, to get an x-ray done on my leg. However, the x-ray machine wasn't working. So there I am in pain, having to go back to school with no treatment whatsoever. They gave me some painkillers, but they were pretty lousy. And the following day, I then had to go to Lilongwe, where I was treated at Kamuzu Central Hospital. So that's an example of some extreme physical pain that I went through. So I'm just going to list out the things that I went through, and then in the end, I'm going to sort of cover how I learned to go through each and every one of them. Another tragedy that I experienced that really shook me a little bit was when I lost my job. Now, losing my job was very painful because it happened at a time where Rachel and I had just gotten married. So I had gotten this new job. These guys had been trying from 2018 to poach me from the company that I was working for. And I was always reluctant. I said, no, I'm happy where I am. And in January 2019, they convinced me to join their team. And, everyone was excited. The new role that they gave me was exciting. And I personally looked at it with high spirits because it was a promotion. However, so I get the job. I start in January 2019. February, March, April, May, nothing seems to be going on. And then in June, I take leave because that's when I had my wedding. So I have my wedding. Rachel and I, we get married. We have our Malawi wedding 1 week, and then 2 weeks later, we head out to the US for our US wedding. Whilst I'm in the US, I receive a letter of redundancy. And, as you can imagine, there I am on my honeymoon with my newly wedded wife, and I receive a letter of redundancy. I mean, this was a tragedy to say the least. However, like I said, I'll share how I was able to tackle that. The next one that I would like to share is, a financial tragedy. In recent times, I've been robbed by, literally armed robbers taking property from me with a lot of money. And it's crazy how, you from time to time you have friends coming to you and saying, look, I want to borrow X amount of money, or if you can do XYZ for me, I'm going to pay you back at XYZ dates, and they don't pay you back. So we've covered traumatic pain, we've covered physical pain, we've covered financial pain, and then obviously there's the pain of emotional pain. Let's say you're in a situation where, I think the easiest one would be covering, let's say, a relationship. So you're with someone, and for one reason or another, and many times a reason that you don't understand, they decide to end the relationship. I too have been in a situation like that. And, such situations can bring about trauma, and such situations can make you feel defeated. However, I would like to share how my experiences and what I went through helped me become a better person. Because I realized now that had I not gone through the things that I went through earlier, I could have been a different person. I reckon I might have been softer on the inside. I would have had less willpower. And so I gained many lessons from the experiences that I went through. From the experience that with the robbers when I was young, what I realized was that many times we like to believe and we want to think that life is in our hands. No, unfortunately, it's not. And that's something that you just need to accept. When you are living in this life, there are other people, other free moral agents who have intentions of their own, and not everyone is going to have good intentions. So you just need to live your life knowing internally that there's going to be a point in time where someone with intentions which are not good is going to cross paths with you. And that's just something you need to accept. That's something that you can't overcome. That's something that you need to know beforehand, and know that when it does happen, you're going to be able to go through it, and it's not going to defeat you, because again, life goes on. With our instance where we got robbed, these guys wiped out our house, but then God had a way of providing. Within a couple of months, my father had just been promoted, and we're able to get back everything that they stole, and even more, and even better, because they would steal like an older version of something, and when we were replacing them with the latest version of something. So that's what I learned from that situation, that if you ever lose something that's dear to you, even in a traumatic way, what you should realize is, yes, that has happened, and yes, that is bad, but bad things happen. And people say things like bad things happen to good people. No, bad things happen to everyone. And that's just something that we need to know and we need to understand beforehand. And then know that when a bad thing happens, turn it into a good thing. Find ways to improve after experiencing that bad thing. My traumatic experience, the physical pain experience, taught me that in this life, like, we want to avoid pain as much as possible, but unfortunately, we're going to encounter situations where we experience extreme pain. Now, I mentioned how I went to the public hospital the first time in Kasumu and they weren't able to assist me. That was one of the longest nights that I've ever had in my whole life because I was in pain. There I am, young 12-year-old with a broken leg. It hasn't been treated, it's swelling. And I went through all sorts of emotions, all sorts of thoughts. But at the end of the day, I woke up the next morning and I realized, despite all this pain, I'm still alive. Despite all this pain, you know, I can still function because at the time I was a student and I learned to function that even within a situation that is painful physically, even in a situation where, because there was a lot of emotions that were going through my mind as well, because obviously I'm young, I break my leg, I'm starting to think, am I going to lose my leg? But I managed in that night to put my mind at ease by realizing that, look, whatever happens, I'm going to be okay. And okay looked in, because I had many permutations in my head of what okay would look like. I mean, the first and best okay that I wanted obviously was for my okay to be me with my leg intact, healed, able to play football again. But I also run through some permutations of okay being me losing my leg, or okay me being with a limp and not being able to play football. And those are some tough things to reconcile with, but I reconciled with them as a 12-year-old. And by reconciling with them, I realized that no matter what was going to happen, I was going to be okay. And thank God that I was able to go to the hospital, get treated, and within 6 weeks, I was back on the soccer field playing soccer, even though my parents said I shouldn't. Now, when I experienced the loss of the job straight after my honeymoon, that one was rough. And I remember that one especially because my wife at the time we have just gotten married and we're expecting that we're gonna move to Lilongwe because my new job, the job that I'd been poached at, the one that had just been made redundant, was in a whole different city. And we had committed to changing our whole lives for this job, and all of a sudden this job wasn't there. My wife was livid, she was not happy. But I took it with a grain of salt. I realized that if things have gone this way and that side of it is beyond my control, I couldn't control the company, I couldn't tell them to give me a job if the work just wasn't there. And so I looked at the situation, I calculated, and I realized, look, Sam, you can't go back to the job because it's not there. You can't go back to your previous employer, obviously, because you left them. And when I left on good books, but there's always that feeling of you can't go back to an employer after being poached by someone. And so I closed that chapter. But what I then realized was it was time to open a new chapter. So I opened this new chapter by sitting down and coming up with a plan of the possible outcomes that I wanted. So I sat down and I came up with possible outcomes, possible routes that I could take. I could go back and seek employment and perhaps find a job as good as the one I just lost, which at the time was going to be pretty hard. This must have been in 2019. I was 27 years old and the job that I had was giving me over a million kwacha, thereabout, take home if I include my housing allowance. So it was a very good job. But what I realized was that for me to find a job at that caliber in my field was going to be tricky. And my next option was, how about I create jobs? I mean, I've just lost a job and I'm pretty sure there's someone out there who has lost a job and they're looking for work. I have some sort of experience. Let me create work for someone else. And that's how I came about creating my company, Iconic Real Estate Agency. And so I created my job and, I feel like things just fell into place. Like it was as if God had already ordained it because I left this job. The job that I left my previous work before the one that made me redundant, I was earning about 290,000 after tax. The job that I left, I was earning about, like I said, give or take about 1.1 million net, including allowances and everything. When I made a decision that I was going to be an employer, that I was going to not look for work, but look for someone to give work to, I kid you not, within a month, the first business transaction that I made, the money that came out of it was 7.5 million. Like, that was just simply amazing. So that taught me that sometimes we find ourselves in situations where things have not gone our way, and it's easy for us to sit and mope. It's easy for us to look at that situation and think that we're stuck and that that's where our life is. But that's not what we should do. We need to pull our socks up. We need to find ourselves, we need to sit ourselves down, have a meeting, examine the facts, and then map a way forward that many times is going to bring us greater results than what we thought we wanted. The last example that I talked about was how sometimes you have failed relationships, and my wife knows she's not the first girlfriend I ever had. I dated some girls before that, and I believe with all my heart that I loved them. But truthfully, I don't think they were going to make me as happy and as fulfilled as my wife makes me now. Like, I look at my life with them and I remember the heartbreaks, sometimes. And hey, I'm going to admit, like, I'm a sappy guy. I'm pretty soft from time to time. I've had situations where I've broken up with someone, and then it takes me a while to get back on my feet. Like, I remember there was just one breakup that I had, should have been like, I don't know, 2017 or something, when I was a kid, or 2016. And I was working at the time, and it was so devastating. Like, my heart was literally aching, so much so that I even quit my job. I stopped doing everything, and then I just kind of let myself go. And in that situation, I realized that the pain of heartbreak, it's real. Sometimes, especially as Christians, and as tough men, we like to trivialize matters of the heart. But matters of the heart are a real thing. Like, you can find yourself in a situation where you're being incapacitated by the fact that you're in severe emotional pain, and that's something that I went through. Now, when I was going through that particular breakup, I always remember having my mentor, who was my man of God, Pastor Aubrey, from RFP Ministries. He sat me down and he talked to me. And I remember my parents talking to me and being very supportive. Even when I told them that, I'm quitting my job because, I'm failing to function, they could have reacted in many ways, but they were pretty supportive, and they understood that, look, if he says he can't work at this moment in time, then he can't work. And I was failing to work. I was failing to eat. I was failing to do everything. So I just love how I had a good backing system, my man of God, my mentor, my parents, and my friends. And having this community really helped pick me back up. And when they picked me back up, I always remember it was the small things that they did, a small text checking up on me, a small call asking how I'm doing, my mom walking into my room and, saying good morning and making sure I woke up, making sure I took a bath. Those are the things that made all the difference. And then in that moment of emotional vulnerability and emotional pain, ultimately for me to come out, what it took was for me to sort of make the decision that I'm going to live through this pain and that there's something better waiting for me in the horizon. And many times it's very easy for us to sort of sit and mope and, decide that, no, I've lost the best thing that's ever going to happen to me. And sometimes, hey, maybe you have lost the best thing that was ever going to happen to you. But what I want to tell you is you've lost the best thing that was going to ever happen to that version of you. It's for you to create a better version of yourself, and then you can receive an even better relationship or an even better job or better business because you have created an even better version of yourself. So that's what I did ultimately. I invested a lot. I think in the previous videos, I talked about the 3 investments that a person needs to make in their spirit, in their soul, and in their body. So I got serious with God once again. I was back in church, I was serving, I was praying. Intellectually, I started to study more. I started to look into what I wanted to do. And then physically, I started to hit the gym. Hitting the gym, playing basketball, those have been my outlets, but those have been outlets which have helped me grow. And the community that you get by going out and being in the gym, playing basketball, your teammates and all this, it ultimately helps you become a better person. As an individual, you're not a singular entity. There's the saying, no man is an island, and it's very true. And we need to learn to utilize the people that we have around us to make us better, and especially when we are at our worst moments. So in today's video, I've shared with you the tough times that I went through, and I shared with you how ultimately it's the decision that you make for you to decide that I'm not going to mope, I'm not going to be kept down. And then you start planning, and then you start making sure that you're interacting with the right people who encourage you. And then ultimately, when you make that decision, everything else falls into place. If you've watched this video this far, I'd like you to hit that like button, hit subscribe, and don't forget to tell a friend about Thoughts of the Young Icon. Thank you.